On this episode, the Actual Fluency podcast, I'm joined by New York-based Jovin, who studied more than 17 languages in the last 4 years.
Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast, the podcast that gives you the tools and inspiration to learn languages faster and more efficiently. And now your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. I'm really excited to bring you the second episode, partly because I have a great guest on today, Jovin, who you will hear very shortly. And partly because I had an amazing response from the first episode. In less than a day, it was downloaded over 50 times, and that's without putting it anywhere. I didn't want to put it on iTunes yet because I wanted to record a few episodes and, see what people thought before I put it out officially. So if you're listening to this as it was released in the late March, then you're among the few to know about this. But thank you so much for listening. It means the world to me, and any comment or feedback that you send to me really motivates me to make it better. With that out of the way, it's time to address a little bit of news. Of course, I have the podcast out, which I discussed in the last episode, but I've also started doing another show. And this isn't a podcast, but it is more of a live show. I'm doing this with a language friend whom I found on a Facebook group. And we called it the Chris and Chris Language Hour. And basically what we do is every Sunday, every Sunday evening in European time, we sit down and we do a Google Hangout live. And we invite everyone who's interested in languages to come on and ask questions or, just interact with us and say what's on your mind that day. And we had the first recording is live. You can find it at actualfluency.com. In the top menu bar, there's a Chris and Chris Language Hour menu item, and you can see a recording on the first episode. And I must say, the quality of the video is a little bit on the bad side. I'm recording this podcast with a $100 microphone, so I know that at least my voice sounds a bit clear. But sadly, the Chris and Chris Language Hour I had using kind of a bad webcam. So we're working on improving that quality, but hopefully what you come to that show for is the quality of the conversation. We also intend to bring on guests. My guest today, Ellen, I already persuaded her to come, and she promised she would stop by. And if I do indeed get a guest on, it won't be an interview situation. It will be more of a casual discussion, just kind of a language lounge. So if you haven't seen the pilot, the first broadcast, I urge you to check it out. actualfluency.com/language hour if you want to type it in. Otherwise, you can find it in the top menu. And with that being said, I think it's time to get to the Jovin segment. And before I do, let me just give you a brief introduction. I got to know Ellen through a Facebook group. And I'm a member of a lot of language learning Facebook groups. But Ellen actually contacted me saying, I see you speak Danish. I see you're interested in learning languages. We have this group with 2,500 people, and it seems like nobody has registered as a Danish native. Would you be interested in coming on and register? I mean, it's nothing official or anything. And of course I said yes, because I love to, Danish is a very limited interest to most people. Most people are interested in the bigger languages or the more obscure languages, and Danish kind of falls in between in that crack where it's not interesting because it's not very exotic, and the country itself is, in the northern Europe. So although we have an interesting history, there's nothing, there's no good weather or beaches or any of that kind of stuff that would usually attract tourists. And then, 6 million people speak it, so it's not like Icelandic that's only spoken by a fraction of that. So it's not obscure enough, but at the same time it's not really widely used enough to be interesting. And the country itself, I'm saying this as a Danish person living in Denmark, I couldn't see why anyone would learn it to be able to visit Denmark, because I just don't see what there is. Of course we have some cultural heritage and everything, but I digress. Jovin from New York, and a very passionate language learner, and I urge you all to listen what she has to say, because I think she gives a lot of good lessons. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the interview. I'm so excited to welcome Ellen Jovin to the podcast today. How are you today, Ellen?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Chris.
No problem. And I know who you are and what you're doing, but maybe there are some listeners out there who don't quite know just who Ellen Jovin is. Could you give like a brief introduction to yourself and what you do these days?
Sure. My background is as a writer and a teacher of sorts. I was a full-time freelance writer for a number of years, and then I started a business with my husband where we do communication skills training for businesses. This is in English. But I go gallivanting around from company to company, running classes in business writing, email etiquette, and grammar, all in English. And then I have, on top of that, starting, it's actually nearly 5 years ago now, a language project / blog where I serially study different languages spoken by large numbers of New Yorkers. Well, some of them are spoken by large numbers of New Yorkers. Most of them are, but they're important to the history or the past or the present of New York City. And so it's sort of a New York in language kind of story that has spiraled out of control and taken over every waking minute.
Well, that's fantastic. So, I mean, how do you motivate yourself? I mean, I like to start the interviews with if you have any kind of success quote or, some really good thing that kind of keeps you motivated.
Well, it's a strange thing because I was away from foreign language for nearly 2 decades, actually. I really was spending all my time either teaching courses or writing, and it was all in English. And then I was looking around for things to write about that related to language. I wanted to do more writing again. I wanted to do more in a realm that fascinated me. And I was initially looking primarily at English, at the history of English, at English grammar. And I suddenly one day, I was out running in Central Park. I thought, well, no, I forget English. I've had enough of English. Let me instead look at a number of languages in short bursts, but pick one at a time and just see how far I can get in a couple months or so. And write about the features of the language, get a better sense of the global world of communication, because I actually felt that my understanding of the way people communicated with one another was very parochial, very limited. I'm used to the subject, verb, object order of English. How are other people doing it? What did all those? What was behind all the writing systems I saw around New York that that I couldn't read? And so I just.
So you were curious.
I was curious, and I don't know. I also. It's something even more than that, I guess. It's there's sort of a built-in fascination for me with how. I don't even know. It's almost like it's almost like a religious reverence, and I think for language, and I think I've had it my whole life. It's manifested itself in different ways, but a lot of the people that I know that frequent language boards and are compulsive students of language, I think would say a similar kind of thing, that there's just something magical about it. That infects them. It's like a disease.
A good one. So, I mean, how on earth did you get started? I mean, you said that you had this long hiatus and then you come back and then you're like, I want to learn a lot of languages. Was that how you started, or did you have a plan, or
yes, well,
how did you do?
And just, I always feel I have to be very responsible about the terminology that I use. I say that I study the languages, because when I use the word learn, I think it's used differently in different languages, those terms. But I feel as though when I say I learn them, that it sounds like I can run around and speak 17 languages, and that is so far from the truth. So I just want to make sure that the that everyone knows that, and that is how I'm presenting it. But just learning, seeing how far I can get with one language for a couple months, and then I go on to the next one. And if I don't do anything with the first one, like most normal human beings, I tend to forget. But for some reason, this doesn't trouble me the way it seems to trouble other people. So anyway, you asked how I got started.
Yeah, how did you wake up one day and say, what changed since you just overnight kind of said, now I want to start working on languages? Because it seems like you did kind of a very intensive, you say these 4 years or so. It seems like you had pretty much the whole year dedicated to, was it 3 or 4 different languages?
Yes, it was very intensive. And I have there's one period, I think, where I took a month and a half, a month and a half off. That was after Polish. Sorry, Polish.
Hard language.
But that was. But generally, I've done work on this every single day of for the last almost 5 years. Some days very little, depending on what my schedule is. But then there are days where it's basically dawn to not dawn to dusk. It's more than dawn to dusk. It'll be dawn to the time I go to bed. And I don't know. I think there was something brewing in me. I really had been looking for a subject that I would latch onto in the realm of language. So I'm sitting near a file cabinet in my office right now as we talk. The file cabinet is the bottom drawer is full of all these old English grammar books. I mean, grammar books, old grammar books for English, where I was reading very extensively about English for some months before I settled on the foreign language thing. And I don't really know how that happened, but I can say that a lot of my ideas over the last 4 years have come to me while I've been running. And I really believe in the power of, for me, physical activity and energy connects with mental energy a lot.
Right.
And so
Tim Ferriss says that as well.
Pardon?
In his Tim Ferriss says that as well in his can't remember if it was 4-hour work week or 4-hour chef, but he says that he felt like when he had in school a day with PE, physical exercise, that the subjects he had immediately following that he tended to do better in.
Really?
So yeah, I
do much better if I do a language lesson while I'm walking in Central Park. I do much better. Almost 100%, almost 100% of the time. I mean, there are always exceptions where you just feel, whatever's going on in your head. But and running's a little more strenuous. So some of these language lessons, it's like you're trying to pronounce Arabic sounds while you're breathing hard and running up a hill. It's a little easier if I'm walking.
But maybe people get scared as well if you run around shouting Arabic words.
I try to manage the volume a little bit, but some of the some sounds are hard to pronounce unless you get a little volume behind them when they're really,
of course,
you can't exactly whisper them. No, but it was really weird. I was actually I think I remember where I was on the east side of Central Park, like probably in the 70s. On the night of June 30th, 2009, when this idea popped into my head. And this is really how it works. So all of a sudden I said, oh my God, that's it. And I ran home. And then the next morning I went to the New York Public Library and I picked a language and I started that day. And so that's the day that my blog began.
A funny fact. Sorry for interrupting.
No, please do interrupt. I must interrupt it.
Sometimes. I also started with Russian.
You did?
So
how did you pick it?
I picked it because I played a video game that had a big Russian user base. But pretty arbitrary, yeah. But I could have rolled the dice or something. But
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So that's one thing we have in common. How well is your Russian now?
Oh, it's terrible. Oh. Yeah, no, because Russian was, that was July and August of 2009, and I have done virtually nothing with it since. But actually, two nights ago or a night ago, I don't remember. I reinstalled the Pimsleur lessons for Russian, and I just began doing them. So I'm It's interesting. This is actually right now I'm starting to cycle through some of the languages again. So I'm seeing what happens when I go back and how much I remember. And the residue, it varies. I seem to have very little residue for Hindi, I must say. But the residue for Russian and for Arabic, which were the first two that I worked on, it's there. So when I do the lessons again, there are some things that pop up that I think I have no recollection of that at all. Did that really happen to me? But then there are other things that sound very familiar, and the sounds are easier to form the second time around. And I haven't gone very far with this, but I am kind of curious to see where I end up. And may I just add one thing? I'm totally impractical, in a lot of ways. So this is not a thing that I would ever recommend that a human being do. There's not really a practical. There's some people in the language learning community who, for good reason, I mean, people should be working on this. They're very practical about how you best, how people can learn a language quickly and go off and speak it. And I think for me, I'm much more of a hedonist. I'm much more motivated by pleasure and what I feel like doing in the moment. So I think that while I am fairly, I think I'm pretty efficient at learning, it's not really the number one goal for me. It's more just this absolute overwhelming delight when I'm learning a new bit of grammar. It's amazing.
Right. See, that's probably a difference between us, because I would prefer as little grammar as humanly possible.
But you probably know a lot of grammar, do you?
Yeah, I mean, because
you grew up in a tradition where actually I think you really learn it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have English in grade 2 and German in grade 6. So,
and do you learn them in a very grammatical way? I mean, do they go?
Yeah.
And so we don't really have that here. I mean, people get it depending on the schools. If you go to certain schools, you're going to get very rigorous training. But a lot of, in general, I would say that it's not a very significant part of American education. And so I get adults in when I teach my business writing classes, I have people in them. Most of them are Americans, maybe, American born native English speakers, probably about 75%, but I'd say about 25% are from other parts of the world. So the people from other parts of the world tend to be more, and it depends on which part you're talking about, but they tend to know more about grammar. And if I start talking about a verb, which I don't usually do in a writing class, but if I did, they are all over it. Whereas I have people in my, native born Americans who cannot find a verb in a sentence. That I think surprises a lot of people from other countries when they realize
I had planned to. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I said when people, I have like some of my Russian students, they can tear apart the sentence grammatically in a way that the Americans could never do. They make mistakes. The Russians make mistakes. But
they'll probably say, "Why are you using so many words?" Yeah.
But they don't have. Americans often don't have the vocabulary or the sense of structure. You are in a position where you can be complacent now because you know all this stuff. You have a sense for it, even if you don't really think about it. I bet you.
And I left it behind.
You've left it behind. You're too grown up for that. I'm still living in my childhood.
Oh, that's nice. If you can rediscover that joy, then yeah. But you talked a little bit about how you're in no way able to speak, so to speak, 17 languages. But if you do a language for 3 months, how far would you typically get? I think it depends on the language.
It depends on the language. And, my biggest success story with the project was Italian, which is not going to be probably a big shock that it was a language like that, which has a lot in common with English and then with other Romance languages, which I had already studied. Sure. But for example, with that one, I knew maybe 10 words in Italian, maybe 8. I listed them, whatever it was. I listed them on my blog when I started. I didn't include things like rigatoni or something. It was, and I started from 0. And so at the end of 3 months, I took a test with a testing service that's based somewhere in the US. I think they're around DC or something. And it's not a fancy test with many hours. Like, it's probably not the most reliable in terms
No,
compared to
no.
some other ones, but they tested. So I tested higher than I had in languages that I'd studied for years in school. So I was tested.
Yeah.
They decided I was, and this is not. I don't agree. I don't happen to agree with this assessment, but I'm just telling you I was able on a test to do this. They rated me 11 out of 12 on writing, which was near near fluent, and then on my speaking. So this is a phone interview. They ask you questions. So you're on a phone. You don't have the social cues. I think phone is a little bit hard in a foreign language.
Sure, yeah.
But so on the phone, I scored. They gave me a 10 out of 12, and I think I maybe got that in German, which I majored in college.
Right.
And then, so I studied it for years, and I spoke it from when I was age 2 to age 4. So I have, even though I don't speak it all like a native, there's some feeling for it in me. So,
right.
So when I put my mind to it, I think I can do pretty well. But my experience with something like Korean was so radically different.
Like that was almost nothing at the end of it.
I couldn't really do that. I mean, I couldn't have had. I had little brief snatches of exchanges with people in Korean neighborhoods here, but it wasn't. It's too mysterious for me. So for me, and I don't want to suffer. I want to go at a normal pace where I feel happy and comfortable. So I sort of experiment with the writing system, and I do the Pimsleur lessons that are available because I just happen to love those. And then I'll try to do what I can, but it's so different. And the learning materials available for major European languages here there's an extraordinary array. So it's just harder. Like Korean, a language like Korean, people tend to take a class. So the materials to teach yourself are not as good usually. And the
writing system, of course, is like a completely different story.
It is, but it's really, I think a lot of times, I think a lot of the people in the very serious language learning community have experienced this. If you're studying, if you're studying an endangered language or a language that's just not studied that often, the quality of the materials is much lower. And as soon as that happens, your ability to learn fast declines.
Right.
You can find, you have to then really make an effort to find partners. But for me, I have to have a supportive writing framework, reading and writing to support the oral work for me to feel comfortable in my head. And if it's not available, it's not available. So I don't like my Korean materials. If someone wants to send me some great links, I'll try again. Give me something else.
But that's a really good point to bring up, is that language learning should never be forced or feel like a chore. You should enjoy it. And if that language, for whatever reason, be it the material is, not interesting, or you just don't like the way it sounds, then you shouldn't really force yourself to do it anyway. I mean, there's no reason to.
No, and I find that question fascinating too. The question of how you pick the language that you study. So, sometimes I see questions online, should I do this language or this language? And the methods that people use to analyze that choice, they're very different. So some people are they're very practical, right? They're saying, oh, well, this is spoken by, 200 million people, whereas this other one is 5 million.
Right.
So, that one's, and I think sometimes, for me, those considerations are relevant. It would probably be a little hard for me to study a language that I think personally, at least at this point, I might change my mind about this later. I don't know how you feel about this, but if there were 1,000 speakers of a language, I probably wouldn't study it.
No, I wouldn't
either.
I wrote about it on my blog that I'm practical first. So
you are.
The language that the language I go for first is one that has some kind of broad appeal. I mean, I think I listed something like Russian and Mandarin as the kind of the top contenders because there are just so many speakers. But more importantly, I feel like is that the speakers of those languages are often not able to speak, let's say, English or another. Well, it's definitely not German, but so if I was to learn, say, Italian or French, they do speak a little bit of English in those countries, being European countries. So even though those are the go-to languages usually, I think I rate something like Mandarin or Russian higher because of that fact.
I think That's very interesting. And I think also you can find that a language that initially seems maybe not that seductive can draw you in. And I like that too, like,
oh yeah,
I was really afraid of Chinese, and I put it off year after. So it was on the calendar for the first year, because initially my project was supposed to be a year. But then when I expanded the project to 2 years, I put it in the second year. And then when I expanded to 3 years, it moved to the third year. So it kept traveling.
Oh, that's funny.
And I felt really guilty about it, because it's so, it's so central, and there's so many Chinese speakers in New York. It's a very big influence in our culture here. And so finally, and I'm not very happy with my achievements in Chinese, but what was interesting when I started looking more closely at it was that there were surprises. The grammar was way easier than I expected. The word order was way easier. There were things that, and you can in fact find plenty of comments from language learners that, Chinese is easy, and that so contradicts everything that I think people in the West are told about it. People who speak a Latin-based language with a Latin-based alphabet, and I also I also felt connected to the culture in ways that surprised me and were lovely.
Right. Yeah, it opens new doors, like very, very new doors, because it's such a unique culture, and they have their own different cultural traditions and just social. If you're in a Chinese, if you're in the companionship of a Chinese person, they act differently, and you can see that all the time. But if you don't know about the language or the culture, then it's kind of a mystery, or an enigma, as you might call it.
I feel very, very shut out of a culture if I have no idea about the language. And I think some people feel that less than others. They can go travel. They can go traveling and look around and appreciate things without having access to that. I feel as though I get so distracted by my lack of access that it's very hard for me to approach it at all. So it's almost like an all or nothing mentality.
Right.
But for me, it's really studying language. I am very into the technical aspects of language. So people ask me often, well, is this, how is this connected to your cultural understanding and so on? I think compared to some people, I'm a little slower on that front. But I think that the language, in terms of absorbing new cultural ideas, I just feel like I have to have the language first, or have elements of the language in place before I can really feel that the door's open.
Right.
It's just sort of, I think it's a little bit of an OCD thing, to be honest with you.
Well, maybe there's something there. I don't know.
Well, I think it is. I'm laughing about it, but I would not be the only person in the compulsive language community who has aspects of that in their lives.
I believe that as well. Is there anything you regret about the way you did it? I mean, you kind of did a lot of languages, a little bit of time. Do you regret sometimes that you didn't follow through with, say, one language a year and then getting, let's say, above social fluency or social fluency?
I have no regrets at all. First of all, I'm not very big on I try to learn from my mistakes, but I did exactly what I wanted to do. I feel ecstatic about it, and I feel that it has just opened doors for all kinds of future explorations, and I'll go back to languages that I touched on. You know what? I really wanted to have a survey kind of in my head, and that's what I achieved. So I picked a bunch of language families, a bunch of writing systems. I did not study Chinese characters, by the way. That I just felt was so overwhelming a task that I saved that for. I looked at it and then I just realized I better just try to work on. You
just speak and understand, and then you really want to.
So maybe that I wish I'd done a little bit more work on. But guess what? I have my future ahead of me, and I'm going to go back to ones that I really enjoyed and felt most drawn to, and then see where that takes me. But in general, my choices for this are going to be motivated by what I feel like doing, because I can't do it any other way.
And the thing you're saying is also that you're not trying to put it into a system where you have 3 months of learning and then maybe a year or two down the line, you go back to it for 3 months to kind of, bring it up to some level. You're basically just going back to explore and see where it takes you. You're not putting everything into boxes or systems. And that's kind of I think that's a very refreshing way of looking at the whole language learning.
You do?
I think a lot of people
so happy to hear that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people are obsessed about finding the right method or the right kind of the one way to learn languages, that the ultimate easiest way. And I think at the end of the day, if you do that, you're not going to be as motivated if you just do how you feel like you say all the time. And does that mean that you're not going to be fluent in a few languages, but you know them a little bit? Yeah. And so what? That's what you feel like doing. So why not do it?
I think, well, that's how I feel. And I think eventually that I will acquire to a high level more languages. But even if that didn't happen, I really think it's going to happen. So I'm not actually particular, but I'm not, but I don't have this idea, I want to have, C2 in 8 languages. I don't,
right.
I really don't care about that. And if someone handed it to me as a gift tomorrow, I would accept the gift. If someone wanted to wrap up 8 languages at a high level and give them to me, I will accept. So please keep that in mind. Anyone who hears this, I will not return the gift. But yeah, I mean, and I also, just as a side note, I'm very interested in reviewing products. So that's really for me a big part of what I do. Like I mean, I've studied a lot of German. I can't say that I actually think my German is in tip-top shape right now because I haven't been using it much. But, all these things come and go. But anyway, that's not my point. My point is that I'm looking right now as I talk to you at 1, 2, 3, about 9 different German products that I want to use and write about. And so I'm sort of on a mission to be the product reviewer, I am a product reviewer. I think that my collection of product reviews is probably one of the biggest
I've seen it.
online.
It's quite impressive, actually. Even from the Mrs. Johnson's bookshop on the 23rd Street or whatever you call the streets over there, to the biggest audio courses. Well, that's quite funny.
Thank you. Well, so anyway, I want to just keep making that bigger. I really enjoy reviewing products, and I also really get kind of annoyed when bad products are marketed as good products. So I feel like I want to be a little bit of a I don't know, what's the
cynical, critical?
Well, of course, I want to have a warm, happy, fuzzy feeling about all this. But if people are blowing hot air about their products and they really kind of stink, I want to say that. And I also want to get more attention for products that are earnest and well-intentioned and maybe don't have a huge marketing budget. I mean, it's very meaningful. I don't know that I have, so I want to extend my reach and give more of a voice to those, because that's what people should be buying, not the thing that they've just heard about the most because they have all the ads everywhere. And
and you talk a lot about sort of traditional books. What do you think about the newer wave of language learning tools, such as the the online services like the Memrise and the Anki's and the Links?
I haven't. I am a little reluctant to admit this on your show, but I'm going to admit it. I still haven't done the Anki. How do you Anki?
I don't know.
I'm obsessed with Memrise right now to the point that I'm not sleeping properly. And
I love Memrise. I mean, but that's the same as Anki though. So
is it?
If you
create your own stuff though, right?
You can create your own stuff in Memrise.
Oh, well, right. It's all user contributed content.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's amazing, isn't it? Like my Russian course, some Russian girl put up 500 words and spoke them all into a microphone for absolutely nothing.
Is that how they are? Is that where all the audio is coming from? Just people speaking?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But I've used so some of those modules are really, really good and some of them really stink. Just like any website with user contributed content. So I found a Russian one that I started using also 2 nights ago or so. So you can see I'm just returning to it. This is
we should what is it, friend up or whatever they call it, and we can be on the leaderboard, see who gets the most points.
I think you might have a little bit of a head start on me, but I'll see what I can do there. I am a membrane. I just want you to know that.
Oh, well, then you're probably above me. I think I'm something. Memtrovert. I don't know. Just came up with that.
But there are frequency course, frequency dictionaries. So the words that are used the most. A lot of those modules I think are the best for different languages. And but my problem is that I can't put it away. It's like a video game. And I know. I just want to tell you one more thing. You said that you were using a video game with a lot of Russian users. One thing that I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, because people are always wondering, what do you do with your languages when you acquire them? What can you do professionally? One thing I've heard, and I haven't really investigated because the world of video games is very mysterious to me and will probably remain so, is that language skills are very useful in that market because of the international reach of some of the games. So I don't know if that's true, but maybe if you study a foreign language, you can be, or maybe if you study multiple foreign languages, you can be a video game god.
Yeah, of course. And it's a bit of a niche, they have big tournaments and stuff, and all the tournaments have transmissions in different languages. So there is definitely a lot of material to go by. And I do listen to some of those. Like I watched the video game somebody else is playing, and then there's a Russian commentator. So it sounds like, football or baseball. They're going completely crazy. And of course it's like almost davai, davai, davai. And, it's great fun. And I don't understand much yet, but I assume if I just, davai I understand, right? But if I just keep going, then I assume I'll get some more. But I don't think if anyone listening out there and it's like, oh yeah, I love video games, I should learn languages so I can become like, it's called eSports usually when it's a bit more professional.
Oh, okay.
I should be an eSports interpreter. But I don't think there's enough, because the funny thing is, the reason I learned English at a very young age was because of video games.
Really?
So
no way.
If you do, yeah, it's true. This is a completely tangent story, but I changed my, your inner voice. You have an inner voice in a language. For you, it's maybe English. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it used to be Danish for me. But one day when I was 11, I was walking home from school and snap, it just changed to English. And I haven't looked back since. And I attribute that to video games and also shows like, Friends and stuff, because we don't dub them. So you get all the stuff over here. And you just breed multilinguals at a very young age.
It's really an amazing thing. I think it is harder to be a polyglot type of person in the United States.
Yeah, monolingualism is quite a big problem. I've seen it on the news a few times where they're like, and you said it as well, that your American clients are worse in the grammar and the basics of language.
Right.
And you would think that if you only know one language, that you would damn sure know what the aspects of it was, Well, we have to face 2 or 3 at a very young age. So
yeah, well, I think when you learn a foreign language, you tend to start to think about a lot of people here have told me that when they study Spanish for the first time, they finally understand English grammar. That's often where they get their best instruction in it.
Yeah, that's probably a good point. Maybe you don't think so much about grammar until you actually.
It's unself-conscious. Then you're just using it. But
yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, you're fortunate enough to live in perhaps the most multicultural city in the world, I've heard.
I think it's either the most or it's way up there in the running.
Yeah. Oh, London is also quite. I lived in London, so I'm familiar with a lot of cultures there. But it must be such a joy to. Let me just say, your blog is really amazing, and it really shows that you have this passion for writing, because every blog post is not just like, oh yeah, I went to this Russian library, I got this book, blah, 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 which sometimes happens for my blog post, but yours is always a story, it's always like a start and an end, and it's just flowing, and you make it seem so easy.
Oh, Chris, that's a very nice comment. Thank you. I'm not sure it's entirely true, but I appreciate. I'm now reviewing some entries in my head as you say that. But anyway, I do try to make it engaging, and it's something that is such a love to me that I mean, I wish I had more hours to write, in fact.
Right. And there was a talk about a book as well. I mean, you wrote some helpful books for the business on your business website, but there was talk about a specific language learning book, right, at some point.
Right. I think I have an idea in my head that's sort of, oh, I'm sorry, my phones, I forgot about the phones. I have I've sort of mutated a little bit the approach that I think I'm going to take on it. But that will be a piece of it, the language learning. It will be. I have a language related idea in my head that I'm developing right now.
Right.
Yeah.
But it will also contain some piece of your own story, I assume.
Yes.
That's good. I mean, I'm jealous, I must say. The fact that you can just, this is Russian Day, and then you go to the Russian quarter or neighborhood or whatever you call it, and then you just go into a Russian bookshop and find some Russian stuff. That's must be incredible, right?
It is really incredible. I think the good news, though, I think there's nothing like experiencing things right in front of you in physical real life. But I do think that for language learning, and I didn't appreciate this so much 4 or 5 years ago when I started, but for people in any corner of the world now, the internet is making those kinds of connections so easy. And, I know people who, one of the people who reads my blog, I think, is in Tennessee, and people think he's nuts for learning languages. They don't understand it. He picks some that are there's no one around him that even knows them, but he can connect with people around the world if he wants. If he wants that to happen, that's there for him. And what a miracle and what a wonderful thing that is. I think, my what I'm envisioning, like one of my little fantasies is that I actually have this thing. I want to go running around to senior centers and encourage more elderly people to study languages, because they can seriously, they could be bedridden and, sort of lonely, but they can hop on a computer now and Skype with someone in Indonesia and try, they could try Indonesian and see what happens. Right. It's great for their minds, and it makes the world so much bigger. I just think that's a miracle.
It's incredible, yeah. Or smaller, maybe, even. Right.
It makes their world, exactly. It makes the world smaller. But the room they're occupying suddenly is, has the international borders dissolve, and they have the whole world before them. And I just think that would be a way for so many people in their senior years to stay connected. This isn't just a young person's sport.
No, not at all.
It's for everyone, and that's one of the myths that I hope can be busted more by the prevalence of web-based learning and chatting tools.
Yeah, I can totally recommend a website called Interpals. I don't know if you know about it.
I've heard about it, but I haven't used it. What can you?
It's basically just a pen pal.
It's not for dating.
No. I mean, that is a very tiny checkbox that says I'm also interested in romance, but it is a pen pal site. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing was, I logged on and I finished my profile, and I was searching for Russian speakers. Basically just Russian speakers. And then I put in my own age bracket. Just, I thought it would be easier to relate to people around my own age. And I found not one, but 2 Russian girls who also were fluent in German. So now I'm learning about Russian in German.
Wow.
So that's, I mean, how can you imagine that some time ago, finding that kind of connection? I mean, and it was just so easy, and there are millions of people on that site.
That's really amazing. See, that's why we have to, if we're going to get the seniors involved, we have to get a bunch of them on, because people do tend to go for their own age range. And I feel sorry for the 180-year-old woman there. And, we've got to get her some friends. But I think this is something I hope I have time to work on in the next year, alongside the many other
you sound like a few projects. Yeah, you got some projects going on, I must say. And another project, you're going to Europe this June.
Oh, that's right. I am.
You signed up for the Polyglot Berlin.
That's right. I'm going to be there.
And I will as well.
So I will look forward to seeing you in real life.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of fun and a lot of interesting talks about language learning. But yeah, Interpals, I could definitely recommend And I don't know if you have, of course, you have your blog, and if any of the links that I mentioned, if people are interested, I put it in the blog post that goes with this episode, and it's episode 2. So that's actualfluency.com/02. Just if you want to find a link like Interpels or some of the blog posts we talked about. But as we're finishing up here, do you have any kind of where can people find you? What are you working on? Any shout outs you want to give?
Well, I'm always working on my website, so they're certainly welcome to visit me there, ellenjovin.com. And I
highly recommend it.
Thank you so much. And I am looking forward to meeting a bunch of crazed language learners at the conference in June.
Yeah, is that going to be your first polyglot, so to speak, conference?
It is.
I don't like the word polyglot.
Why don't you like it?
Because I think it creates kind of an elitist inner group that it shouldn't be. I
find that an interesting comment. I don't dislike the term, but I dislike applying it to myself, because then I start measuring all my deficiencies immediately. That's I feel I don't like. I'm so particular about like English. I feel that I have a pretty good command of English, but I'm always
definitely. I would call you fluent.
I think I'm fluent by now.
Yeah, I think so.
But
definitely.
Yeah, I'm not really into the measurement thing. So people can test me if they want when I get there and see how they think my skills are. But I'm not really. I also and I don't know how many languages that means and whatever.
Yeah, and maybe if you studied 17 of them, maybe you just don't honestly have any idea. Like, how many of those are you fluent in? Can you just say that immediately? I mean, I wouldn't.
I know what I can have a conversation in right now without having problems, and those are the ones that I've spent more time on, which are German, French, Spanish, and then if you give me a month, I think I would be okay in Italian, and if you gave me
3 months
or 3 months, then maybe Portuguese as well. But I'm pretty aware of my limitations, and I don't think you don't get partial credit for a language. So either you speak it or you don't. Like, you don't get to say I speak I speak 1/10 of what a speaker can do in like a fluent speaker can do in Spanish, and I do that for 10 languages. So that counts as a language. That doesn't work.
No, of course not. But maybe that's kind of the whole point of it, is that some people see languages as a means to communication, but you don't necessarily.
I don't want to talk to anyone, Chris.
You're only interested in the grammar. Well, that's fine. I mean, but you know what I mean? I tried to learn a language to speak it, and that means that I can't just do 3 months. I'm doing this for Russian for some stupid reason, but that's because the Polyglot Berlin conference is coming up, and I wanted to challenge myself, and but I don't have a fixed time period usually. So I'm aiming for social fluency, like you mentioned before. I'm not as fascinated by grammar and individual structure as you are. So for me, it's a little bit different. But I think that's the whole takeaway, is that you need to find your angle when you're learning languages, and why are you doing it.
Definitely.
Because if you can't answer the why, then the how is really, really difficult.
That's a very good point. I would just like to say that if I could speak fluently my languages, I would really like that. And the ones that I can't, I get a great deal of pleasure out of. I mean, for me, it's so much fun to jump around. I've done volunteering in New York, where I've been able to speak 6 languages in a morning or something like that. And for me, that is such a mental pleasure. And my hope is that I'll be able to do that more, and for more, better, and for more languages down the road. But absolutely, I think that I get pleasure out of certain obscure things that don't give pleasure to other people. And we're all individuals. We have to appreciate our strengths and outsmart our shortcomings.
And on that bombshell, I think it's time to end, sadly. But it's been a great pleasure, and we could talk for hours, and I'm looking forward to doing just that in June. But Ellen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for coming aboard this early ride of my podcast. We'll see how it goes. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. It was wonderful.
Thank thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency podcast. For more information, be sure to check out actualfluency.com. Until next time, enjoy learning and have a great day.